Hiya, this is part 1 on a temporary mind awakening. And in this one, I want to talk about the unknowableness that was really palpable. So when the mind felt like it got unplugged, there was no belief in any thoughts anymore. And the presence that we are normally kind of connecting to when we're in meditation seemed to just be more palpable, was just kind of more obvious. And the mind was kind of more in the background, if that makes sense. And really for me, there was, in this experience I was having, it was that there was kind of no thoughts unless the thought was needed. But what was really palpable in this presence, was this unknowability. And usually we have a sense on an intellectual level that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So we might get into a relationship, we don't know if it's going to be 1 year, 10 years, we start a new career, we don't know if that's going to make enough money. We have a sense that we don't know what's going to happen. And we have an intellectual understanding of that. But that isn't really what I'm talking about. It's not what I'm talking about at all when it comes to this unknowability. So even though we have this intellectual understanding that we don't know what's going to happen in the future, the mind is also coming up with stories all the time about the future, about what's going to happen. So you wake up in the morning, you're thinking, I'm going to go to work today, I'm going to meet Sally later on, I'm going to go to my mum's at the weekend, whatever it is. These are all the stories and the thoughts that are happening in our mind that gives us this storyline, that gives us this sense that we kind of do know what's going to happen. Because the mind is telling us, it's making up these stories about what is essentially going to happen. So there's these two things going on in the mind. There's this intellectual understanding that we don't know what's going to happen. And then there's also the mind that is basically future thinking. You know, it's kind of a future narration of what is going to happen, or narrative, a future narrative of what is going to happen. But the unknowableness had nothing to do with thoughts, because both of those are thoughts. Like, either the story of a future is thought, or this intellectual understanding that we don't know what's going to happen is also a thought. And this unknowableness in the mind awakening definitely wasn't a thought. It was kind of beyond the thought. And when the mind came in and said something like, something maybe to do with what was going to happen in the future, I'm going to start this new career, and all the thoughts that would be attached to that. So, it might not work out, and should I do this, and maybe I should do this, maybe I don't know. Maybe fears that would come up around the fact that it might fail, it might not work out. And yet, while I was watching all of these thoughts that I didn't have any belief in, there was also kind of underneath this unknowable, this palpable unknowableness that was kind of like, well, you just don't know what's going to happen. So whatever the mind was saying, it just kind of didn't matter, because this unknowableness was kind of like, knew for certain that it couldn't know, if that makes sense, even though it didn't, it's not a knowing. So it kind of, and if I think about when I was having the thoughts, so how it would usually be is that I'd have some thoughts, this might not work out, should I do this, maybe I'll book this and do this, and then maybe some fears coming up about it not working out, and there would be a belief there in the thoughts themselves, unless I then made the effort to step back from the thoughts. Whereas when the mind had been kind of unplugged, detached, it just felt like there was a freedom, there was a kind of, the thoughts, it was almost more enjoyable to have the thoughts because you weren't believing any of them anymore. So the thoughts felt more, I suppose they, in a way, they kind of felt a bit more free to be just whatever that was arising. And it was as if you were detached from those thoughts, and then there was this underlying sense of peace. So it's like, well, whatever happens will be totally fine. And this sense of you can't know anything, like, and with that you can't know anything, it was you could kind of sense that every moment was so fresh. And even the word moment isn't really the right word. And I would say, I would want to say like millisecond of a millisecond, but even that isn't. It's like there was this freshness, aliveness to the presence that when I was just doing meditation before, I couldn't really access that sense of aliveness, that sense that just how it's so hard to explain. Just because the unknowableness and the aliveness and the kind of freshness of the moment were kind of all one thing, you know? And so it kind of gave you this deeper sense of, you know, just how much you couldn't know. More so than, say, on an intellectual level. Because on the intellectual level, we kind of know it, but, you know, we still think that we still think that there's a controller who is deciding everything. And when the mind awakening was happening, it was seen that there wasn't a controller either. But really it was this sense of every millisecond, however you want, whatever word you want to use, felt so fresh that it could never be made into a narrative. And it was the making everything into a narrative that created some sense of knowability.